This is the story of a man who challenged God and received his answer through an eagle. Would you believe it if you saw something like that with your own eyes? Yet that is exactly what happened, and what you are about to hear may change the way you see life itself. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Here, every story has a soul, and maybe one of them is yours. And I promise, this one you will want to watch until the very end. Because the impossible can happen when we least expect it. And sometimes, what feels like silence from God is actually His care, guiding our steps in ways we don't even notice. Stay with me because this is not just his story. It could be yours too. The night was heavy, the damp air clung to his skin, and every step echoed like a dry crack among the trees. The silence was so deep it seemed to mock his weakness. He walked as if carrying an invisible weight, heavier than the darkness itself. Suddenly he stopped. His chest heaved, his hands trembled, and anger rose like fire. He lifted his eyes to the clouded sky and shouted, "If you exist, show me now!" His voice echoed and was lost among the treetops, as if the universe itself had chosen to ignore him. Silence returned quickly, cruelly, leaving only the pounding of his heart. He leaned against a tree, trying to contain his despair. Sweat dripped down his face, but the real burning came from inside. How had he gotten here? What had pushed him to doubt everything? The forest gave no answers, only shadows. And in that moment, he realized a disturbing truth. Before getting lost in the woods, he had already been lost in life. Before everything collapsed, he was just another face in the crowd. He woke up early, eyes still heavy with sleep, and rushed to catch the overcrowded bus. At work, he followed orders, did more than he was asked, but rarely heard a thank you. Still, he believed that someday effort would be rewarded. He carried a simple dream in his heart. A small house, a united family, quiet nights. On the outside, he looked stable. He greeted neighbors with a smile, exchanged quick jokes with colleagues, and pretended everything was fine. But inside, cracks spread silently. Each humiliation, every broken promise at work fell on his shoulders like stones. And when he came home, the silence was too heavy. He lay in bed exhausted, but his mind spun without rest. He still had faith, and it was that faith that kept him standing. He whispered prayers, asking for strength, believing that tomorrow would be better. Sometimes he closed his eyes and imagined himself free, walking down a road without rush, without people stepping over him. But tomorrow never came. Only more bills, more demands, more injustices. And each time he got out of bed, it felt as if a piece of him stayed behind. No one noticed, but he was slowly fading. His laughter no longer had brightness, his eyes no longer carried hope. It was as if he lived on autopilot, pushed only by the obligation to exist. Time stole his joy, and routine stripped away the confidence he still carried in his heart. Deep down, he began to feel invisible, as if his life made no difference to anyone. But what he did not know was that this was only the beginning. Because when life decides to test someone, it is never content with small wounds. It always saves a bigger blow, the one that takes away the ground beneath your feet and forces you to look up. And without realizing it, he was already walking toward that blow, the moment that would make his faith truly shake. At work, he believed honesty was enough, but in an important meeting, he watched his idea disappear into silence, until a colleague repeated the exact same words minutes later. Everyone applauded, the boss smiled, and he stood there, swallowing hard. His blood boiled, but his lips did not move. In that instant, he felt as though he had vanished from his own life. Days later, the promotion came. Not for him, of course, but for the colleague who had learned to speak louder. "You are very good, but you lack leadership presence," they said. Words that struck like a slap across the face. He left the room with watery eyes, trying to hide the rage that burned inside. Injustice tasted bitter, and the worst part was knowing he didn't have the courage to fight back. Friends, who should have been a safe harbor, revealed themselves as only shadows. When he called asking for help in a difficult moment, one replied coldly, "Man, not now, I'm busy." Another laughed at his situation, calling him naive. Each phrase was like a slow knife piercing his chest. He hung up the phone with a knot in his throat, realizing he could count on no one. Out on the street, the indifference weighed even more. He bent down to help, but was treated as invisible. One day, he held the door for an elderly woman to pass. She walked through without even looking and muttered, "That's your duty." The words pierced him like a dart. He forced a nervous smile, but inside, his heart shut a little more, as if every act of kindness was nothing but weakness. These small wounds piling up were worse than a great tragedy, because no one noticed, no one cared. But inside, he bled slowly, like a glass filling drop by drop until it overflowed. And with each passing day, he felt that overflow drawing near. The ground beneath him began to crack, and soon the fall would come that would change everything. One day, walking distractedly down the street, he saw her. His heart raced instantly. She was smiling, her hair loose in the wind, just like in the memories he kept. But she was not alone. Hand in hand with a man, she walked closer without noticing his presence. In that moment, something inside him collapsed. He tried to smile, to act natural. When she saw him, she waved with sincere joy and introduced her boyfriend without hesitation. He shook the man's hand, responding as if nothing had happened. On the outside, it was just another casual meeting. On the inside, it was an earthquake. His chest burned, but his face hid the pain behind the mask of politeness. Hours later, at home, he removed his shoes slowly and sat on the edge of the bed. His body felt heavy, as if he had been beaten. The silence of the room swallowed him, and there he broke. Tears came uninvited, soaking the pillow that had so often kept his dreams. But now, there were no more dreams, only emptiness. He asked himself how he could have believed, how he had confused friendship with promise, affection with love. She had no fault. He knew that. Yet he still felt deceived by his own hope. "I was never chosen," he whispered through sobs. A short, dry sentence that came out like a verdict. That night marked the end of an illusion. From then on, every message from her was like a knife twisting slowly. He wanted to be happy for her, but he couldn't. His heart was too tired. And deep down, he began to believe that even God didn't care about his pain. After all, if love is the greatest gift, why had he never been worthy of receiving it? Nights became too long. He lay down trying to pray, but the words would not come. When he forced them, they came out dry, without soul, as if he were speaking alone in the dark. The ceiling above became an abyss, and silence was the only answer. With each unanswered prayer, the feeling of abandonment grew, until he began to wonder if he was only speaking to nothing. At work, he kept smiling, but inside, faith no longer lived there. He walked through the streets like a body present, but a spirit absent, a ghost nobody noticed. Once he had believed that injustices were lessons, trials to endure. Now, they seemed like senseless punishments. The world seemed to laugh at his naivety, and he began to believe that God, if he existed, had already given up on him. One afternoon, sitting alone on a park bench, he watched people rush by, families smiling, couples holding hands, children running, and he thought, why not me? His chest tightened and bitterness filled his heart. For the first time, he no longer felt like trying again, no longer wanted to rise once more. The small flame that had remained in him went out completely. It was the end of faith. And when faith dies, life loses its meaning. That morning, he woke with the feeling that he no longer fit inside his own life. The room seemed suffocating, the walls closing in, and even the cell phone buzzing on the nightstand felt like a prison. He looked at the lit screen, the boss's name flashing, and pressed the button to turn it off. The silence that followed felt like a muffled scream inside him. For the first time, he didn't want to respond to the world. He rose slowly, opened the window, and breathed deeply. The city air smelled of smoke, noise, and hurry. He felt he needed to get away. He didn't want to disappear, but he no longer wanted to live that way. He thought of a simple solution: to walk until concrete no longer ruled over anyone. A trail, the green, the silence. Maybe there, he could find himself. He grabbed an old backpack, placed a bottle of water and a piece of bread inside. Nothing more. The gesture was impulsive, but carried something liberating. He closed the door without locking it, as if it didn't matter whether he returned. His steady steps carried him through the streets until the sound of cars began to fade, replaced by the distant song of birds. Each block left behind was like dropping another weight from his chest. When he reached the entrance of the forest, he paused. His heart raced, not with fear, but with excitement. He inhaled deeply, and the first breath of fresh air seemed to wash his soul. His body felt lighter, as if being reborn. Here, there were no bosses, no demands, no bitter memories, only trees, wind, and silence. For the first time in a long while, he was alone without feeling small. But as he walked deeper, a strange feeling accompanied him, as if that silence held answers he was not yet ready to hear. Each step was an invitation, but also a warning. And without realizing it, he was no longer just fleeing the world. He was stepping into a path that would change everything. The further he walked along the trail, the more he felt the city had been left far behind. His body tired, but his soul seemed to breathe. There was something addictive about that silence, broken only by wind and birdsong. Yet his restless mind wanted more. He didn't just want to hide. He wanted to be free. He needed to prove, even for a moment, that he could still feel life pulsing through him. That was when he approached a group preparing to fly hang gliders. He watched them adjust their gear, ready to launch themselves from the mountaintop. His heart pounded just watching. For a few seconds, he imagined himself up there, gliding freely, without pain, without memories. A voice inside whispered, "This is what you need." And he knew he wouldn't leave without trying. When he strapped the equipment to his body, his hands trembled. The wind struck hard, whipping his hair, and the vastness opened up before him. There was no going back, no guarantees, only that step into the void. He breathed deeply, closed his eyes for a moment, and jumped. And in that instant, as his feet left the ground, the weight of years seemed to fall away too. For the first time, he felt he was flying not only through the sky, but away from his own pain. At first, it was like a dream. He glided through the air with open arms, feeling the wind rush against his face, his heart light as never before. Below, the forest stretched green and infinite, and for the first time in so long, he smiled effortlessly. The world seemed small, distant, as if his problems had remained stuck on the ground. In that moment, he believed that maybe it was possible to begin again. But life loves to turn the page without warning. A stronger gust shook the wing, and he lost control for a second. He tried to recover, but his sweaty hands slipped on the equipment. His whole body tensed, his heart raced. What had been freedom turned to panic. The vastness of the forest now looked like a trap waiting to swallow anyone who dared to fall. He tried to steer back, but he had no technique, no experience. The wind dragged him deeper into the wilderness. His sense of security shattered in an instant. He screamed, but the sound vanished into the air, and in a brutal dive, he felt his body plummet, the trees rushing closer too fast. The flight that had seemed like liberation was turning, before his very eyes, into a fall. His body was in shambles. The crash hadn't killed him, but left marks everywhere. His scraped knees bled, his torn shirt smelled of dirt and sweat. Air came in ragged sobs, each breath a struggle. He staggered to his feet, trying to orient himself, but saw only tall trees and lengthening shadows as the sun disappeared. His heart pounded. He was alone, lost, without water, without direction. He walked a few more meters, dragging his feet among dry branches that cracked loudly, as if mocking every step. His backpack had been left behind, along with the little that could have helped him. His stomach already complained, his mouth was dry, and his mind spun between fear and rage. He stopped suddenly, hands on his knees. Sweat dripped to the ground. And there, in the suffocating silence of the forest, the question struck him like a punch. Why me? Despair rose like a wave. He threw his head back and shouted, "If you exist, show me now!" His voice echoed strong but quickly died, swallowed by the trees. The silence that returned was even more cruel. He fell to his knees, fists pounding the ground, tears mixed with the dirt on his face. "Answer me!" he cried again, his throat burning. Nothing. Only the distant rustle of leaves. Anger grew. He pressed his fist against his chest and muttered through clenched teeth, "If you don't exist, then let me die here now." The weight of those words made the air feel heavier. He stayed there, waiting for lightning, a wild beast, anything to end it, but nothing happened, only emptiness. In that instant, he felt such a deep loneliness that he almost believed the entire world had forgotten him. Suddenly, a different sound cut through the silence. At first faint, like a distant whisper, a beating of wings. Slowly, he lifted his head, tear-filled eyes struggling to focus on the darkening sky. Between the treetops, a vast shadow moved. His heart raced. For a moment, he thought it was an illusion, born of hunger and fear. But then he heard it again, the rhythmic, powerful beating. It was no dream. It was real. An eagle appeared against the orange glow of sunset. Enormous, imposing, as if part of the light itself, because God was already in everything, in every detail. The path grew clearer when he heard footsteps in the distance. A soft voice called out, "Are you okay?" He turned and saw a young woman, dressed simply for hiking, carrying a flashlight and a bottle of water. She reached out a hand, concerned. She said she knew the area and could help him find his way out. Relief came instantly, like an unexpected embrace. As they walked together, he pointed upward. "Did you see that eagle? It brought me here." The woman stopped, looked confused, and shook her head. "I didn't see anything," she replied. He insisted, pointing again. "Look, right there." But when his eyes returned to the sky, the space was empty. The bird had vanished, as if it had never existed. A shiver ran through his skin, but this time it wasn't fear. It was peace. He smiled through tears, realizing he no longer needed any proof. God had revealed himself in the simplest yet most powerful way. Not in the grandeur of a visible miracle, but in the detail that changed everything. The certainty that he had never been alone. With every step back toward the city, he felt transformed. He was no longer the man who had entered the forest carrying anger and emptiness. Now he was someone carrying in his chest a new faith, pure, alive, unshakable. The world would remain unjust, harsh, full of trials. But within him, something had been reborn. And that flame, he knew, would never again be extinguished. And what about you? Lost in the forest of your own life? How many times have you cried in silence, begging for an answer that never came? Maybe you too are waiting for a grand sign, something impossible to ignore. But what if the answer is already in the details? In the embrace of a friend, in the care of a stranger, in the simple fact that you woke up today? The truth is, it is not God's presence that is missing. It is our silence. We live armed, distrustful, always expecting the world's blow. But God does not impose himself. He waits, with patience and mercy, until we open our hearts. That was what this man discovered, and that is what can transform your life too. So I ask you, could it be that you are also being guided by an eagle without realizing it? Could it be that there are clear signs around you, waiting only for you to trust? If this story spoke to you, if it touched your heart in any way, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video. Here, every story has a soul, and maybe the next one will be yours.